If this hits close to home, tap that subscribe button. New videos like this drop every week. You've seen it happen. Maybe you were in it. A group of brilliant people, talented, experienced, sharp, gets put together on a project, and instead of producing something extraordinary, they produce chaos, missed deadlines, blame games, people talking over each other instead of with each other, ideas getting buried under ego, meetings that feel like slow-motion collisions. And the worst part, you look around and think, how? These are some of the smartest people I've ever worked with. Here's what nobody walking into that situation ever stops to ask. What if intelligence was never the problem? Think about that for a second. We spend so much energy hiring for IQ points, building resumes, stacking credentials on credentials. The assumption, this deep, almost religious belief, is that if you just get enough smart people in a room, something remarkable will happen. But study after study paints a completely different picture. At MIT, researchers outfitted hundreds of workers in different industries with small electronic badges, almost like invisible monitors, that tracked something most companies never bother to measure. Not output, not strategy, not individual performance scores. They tracked how people talked to each other, and what they found quietly rewrote everything we thought we knew about teamwork. The groups that performed best, the ones that solved problems faster, made fewer mistakes, generated more creative ideas, weren't the groups packed with the highest individual talent. They were the groups where people talked and listened in roughly equal measure, where team members made direct contact with each other, not just with whoever was in charge, where conversations were energetic, short, alive. The content of those conversations barely mattered. The signal behind them, the invisible thread running through every exchange, was what made all the difference. And that signal said one thing, quiet, over and over again. We are safe here. We are connected. Now here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. One researcher decided to run an experiment with small groups, assigning each team a simple creative task and secretly planting one of three types of actors: someone energetic and curious, someone passive and withdrawn, or what he called a bad apple. This third character was dismissive, cynical, rude. He'd roll his eyes. He'd say things like, "That's the worst idea I've ever heard." He'd drag the energy down like an anchor. And what do you think happened? The bad apple didn't just make the group less pleasant. His presence dropped team performance by 30 to 40% every single time. But here's the twist, the part that nobody talks about. The groups that managed to neutralize the bad apple and maintain their performance weren't the ones with the toughest manager. They weren't the ones where someone stood up and gave a big motivational speech. They had one person, one quiet person, who kept things safe. This person didn't argue with the bad apple. He didn't shut him down. He would simply turn to the group, smile, and say, "Hey, what do you think about that?" Just that. Just redirecting energy, creating space, sending one small, steady signal, "You matter here," and the group held together. That's the first crack in the story we've been told, the crack that reveals what's actually underneath. Brilliant teams don't fall apart because people aren't smart enough. They fall apart because they don't feel safe enough to be honest. Now let's go deeper, because there's a layer beneath psychological safety that most leadership books gloss right over. You've probably heard that phrase, psychological safety. It's become a corporate buzzword, right? A poster in the break room, a checkbox in the annual review. But what researchers actually discovered is something far more specific, far more uncomfortable. The glue that holds high-performing teams together isn't just being nice to each other. It's not even trust in the traditional sense, that warm feeling you get over years of working side by side. It's something called a vulnerability loop. And the moment you understand what it is, you'll start seeing it, or the terrifying absence of it, everywhere. Here's how it works. Person A admits something uncertain, something incomplete. "I don't know if my approach is right. What do you think?" That's a small act of exposure, a micro risk. They're handing something fragile to another person. Person B responds not by pulling back, but by leaning in. Maybe they admit their own uncertainty. Maybe they offer something they haven't shared before. A real opinion, a fear, a doubt. And just like that, something shifts in the air between them. That exchange, that brief, almost invisible moment of mutual vulnerability, builds more genuine trust than 6 months of team-building retreats. Researchers who study cooperation have a striking way of putting it. Exchanges of vulnerability, which we naturally tend to avoid, are the pathway through which trusting cooperation is built. Think about that. The exact thing your instincts tell you to hide from your colleagues, your uncertainty, your gaps, your "I don't have this figured out," is the precise ingredient that makes real teams real. And here's the counterintuitive punch. Leaders who appear most invulnerable. Destroy this loop without even knowing it. There's a story about one of the most iconic figures in tech history, someone who ran one of the most creatively explosive companies ever built. And how did he open meetings with his design team? Here's a dopey idea. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it was genuinely dreadful, as people close to him later recalled with affection. But that phrase did something invisible and powerful every single time. It told the room, limits are welcome here. Incomplete thoughts belong here. The group owns this, not just me. The signal was always the same. You have a role here. I need you. Teams that operate without vulnerability loops don't just perform worse. They develop something much more insidious, a culture of performance, where everyone plays the role of having it all together, where bad news travels slowly, where the first sign of a problem gets buried under optimism, politics, or silence, and by the time that problem surfaces, it's no longer a small problem. You'll mid-video after delivering this value. If you're getting something out of this, a like helps more people find it. Takes 2 seconds. Let me take you inside a room you'd never expect. A hospital operating theater, a surgical team trying to master a brand new, minimally invasive technique, one of the most complex procedural shifts in modern medicine. 16 hospital teams were learning it at the same time. On paper, the most experienced team should have dominated. They didn't. A different team, with comparatively less seniority, ended up completing surgeries a full hour faster by their 20th procedure. They were ranked second out of 16 teams overall, while some of the most pedigreed groups never found their rhythm at all. The researcher tracking all of this expected to find the answer in surgical skill, equipment, or institutional support. She found it in something else entirely. The successful teams shared 5 specific behaviors, not techniques. Behaviors. Their leader told them explicitly why their individual contributions mattered, not in a generic motivational way, but specifically, personally. They rehearsed not just the procedure, but the communication around the procedure. When something looked off, people were actively encouraged to speak up, coached through it, not just permitted. And after each surgery, the team came back together to reflect, discuss, pull apart what happened and why. The unsuccessful teams, their leaders assumed everyone already knew their role. They skipped the dry runs. They never explicitly invited dissent. They moved from one case to the next without ever pausing to learn from the gap between what happened and what they intended. Same procedure, same hospitals, radically different outcomes. Here's what this reveals about every team you've ever been part of. Competence without connection is a house with no foundation. You can have the most technically brilliant people on earth, but if they don't know why their role matters, if they can't speak up without fear of looking weak, if the team never stops to examine itself honestly, the whole structure is quietly crumbling. There's another experiment that makes this even clearer. A competition where teams had to track down 10 large red balloons hidden across an entire country. The reward was significant. The stakes were real. Most teams immediately tried to recruit as many individual searchers as possible, maximizing their reach by withholding information, keeping participants in the dark about the reward structure, protecting their advantage. One team did something nobody else thought to do. They made themselves vulnerable first. They told every single person connected to finding a balloon that everyone in that chain would share in the reward. They opened the loop instead of closing it. They created webs of mutual investment rather than one-way pipelines of information. That team found all 10 balloons in under 9 hours. Their competitors didn't come close. Cooperation, it turns out, isn't a personality trait. It isn't something some teams have and others don't. It's a muscle, and it grows through one specific exercise, the repeated, deliberate practice of being exposed together and choosing to stay in the room anyway. So here's the question that's been building this whole time. Why? Why do brilliant teams, equipped with every resource, every credential, every strategic advantage, still fall apart? The answer lives in a gap that most organizations never bother to measure. The gap between what a team can do and what a team will do when things get hard. Think about a flight crew. Imagine a commercial aircraft, engines gone, hydraulics failed, the plane turning into something closer to a guided rock than a vessel. 28 professional crews were placed in simulators and given the exact same conditions. All 28 crashed, but one crew, the real crew, the one actually in the air that day, landed the plane, not because they were more skilled than the simulated crews. They were roughly equivalent. They landed it because the moment things went sideways, someone in that cockpit did something almost impossibly simple. Does anybody have any ideas? Tell me what you want, and I'll help you. That's it. That's the whole thing. 3 sentences that dismantled every hierarchy in the room. 3 sentences that turned a chain of command into a circle of intelligence. That crew survived because they found a way, in the most terrifying few minutes of their professional lives, to unlock something researchers now call collective intelligence. Not the sum of individual smart decisions, something qualitatively different. A group mind that emerges only when people trust that their voice matters and their limits are allowed. Here's what collective intelligence looks like when it's working. It doesn't feel like strategy. It feels like jazz. Every person listening as much as they're playing. No one trying to be the loudest instrument in the room. Ideas passed back and forth like a ball in motion. No single person holding it long enough to own it. Something being built in real time that none of them could have built alone. And it breaks, it shatters. The moment someone in that circle starts performing instead of participating, the moment safety disappears, the moment a person decides that being right matters more than being real. Here's the brutal truth behind every failed team you've ever witnessed. They didn't lose because of a lack of talent. They lost because someone stopped signaling, "I need you," and started signaling, "I don't need anyone." The research on this is unambiguous. High-performing groups describe themselves not with professional terms, but with one specific word: family. Not because it's sentimental, because that word captures something structural, a relationship where your role is secured not by performance alone, but by belonging, where you can say, "I don't know," without losing your place at the table. Here's the closing layer of this, the one that changes how you walk into a room tomorrow. Collective intelligence isn't just built through grand gestures. It isn't the result of a visionary leader with a brilliant speech. It's built through small, repeated, almost invisible signals. A leader who opens a meeting by saying, "I'm not sure about this, what do you all think?" A team that builds a literal wall where people post their failures, not their wins. A group that sits together after a hard loss and asks, with genuine curiosity, what actually happened and what can we learn from it? These behaviors feel almost embarrassingly simple, and that, research suggests, is exactly why so few teams practice them. Because simple doesn't feel serious. Vulnerability doesn't feel strategic. Admitting limits doesn't feel like leadership. But here's what every genuinely high-performing group, every elite military unit, every breakout creative studio, every surgical team that beat the odds has figured out that the rest haven't. The strongest thing you can say in a room full of intelligent people is not, "I have the answer." It's, "I need your help." That's the shift. That's the whole thing. Not more talent, not better processes, not smarter strategy. A team that breathes together. A team where vulnerability isn't a weakness. It's the mechanism, the engine, the one thing that turns a collection of brilliant individuals into something that can actually fly. You've sat in meetings that felt like that, where something was alive in the room, where ideas sparked off ideas and nobody checked the clock. You've also sat in meetings where that was completely absent, where people said the right things and meant none of them. The difference wasn't the agenda. It was whether anyone in that room felt safe enough to be real. That's the psychology hiding in plain sight, and now you can see it. Drop a comment. Have you ever been on a team that just clicked? I want to hear what made it different.